So what is the difference between climate adaptation and resiliency, especially
So
in flood-prone areas and response to sea level rise?
yeah, so resiliency can be a tool for climate adaptation. And that can be something that when we talk about climate adaptation, it is the realization that the world is changing, the climate is shifting, we have new extremes that we haven't experienced before, and we are adapting to them proactively. We're not waiting for them to require change. We're trying to change ahead of what the requirement will be. And when we talk about resiliency, we look at, again, a sustainability I would put under kind of emissions mitigation and understanding what mankind's impact is on the planet, whereas the inverse of that is resiliency, of looking at nature's impact on mankind and on the man-made.
And do they go hand in hand, or they could contradict at one point in time?
Oh no, they're absolutely hand in hand. They're not the same thing. They're different things. But for example, if we have a project and we're building a bulkhead and we sustainably source the material and it's low emission, low carbon footprint concrete, and we assemble it, and we weren't thinking with a resilient mindset, and maybe we redesigned what was there before and it failed because it wasn't tall enough or whatever the reason was, and the intended design life was 30 years, but because we weren't thoughtful about the current climate, regardless of what the code said we should do, and that structure fails in 10, not 30, then we have to rebuild it. So then we're demolishing again, we're rebuilding again, the carbon footprint goes up, so it wasn't resilient, and thereby it wasn't actually sustainable because we're putting that same effort in more than twice. So that's why, yeah, they absolutely go hand in hand, but they are different things.
Have you ever been into projects where you had to redo the whole work because of that?
I mean, never on our own project, but yeah, there are things that do fail. There are things that have a shorter time life than anticipated. There are weather extremes that come quicker than ever anticipated before. And so certainly we are hyper aware of, failures in structures, and it's not always an acute failure. Sometimes it's, some cracking or things that will lead us to believe it will fail in a shorter time life than it was intended for. And so whether it's repair work or rehabilitation work, we do get involved in various projects, and typically where we can, try to repair or rehabilitate and not completely demolish and build new. There are advantages, certainly to the environment, to the environmental impact of doing that type of method.
Is it more expensive to develop a property that takes into consideration climate adaptation and resiliency?
It depends on in what terms you're defining expenses. I mean, financially only, it could be. And it also depends on if you're seeing infrastructure as an expense or as an investment, because oftentimes infrastructure is a first line of defense to protect other assets upland. And so if your infrastructure fails, you're making vulnerable other assets as well, whether or not on the immediate property or for the community. And so other metrics that we look at in terms of expense beyond the financial is certainly loss of human life. If you have a catastrophic event and the structure fails and you lose lives, that's, the most extreme type of expense. And so depends on how you're defining that question.
No, I meant financially, like as a project and as a development, it costs more if you were to build a climate adaptable property versus just
so
conventional one.
The upfront cost, again, maybe more, but the design, the life cycle design cost on the long term of what the intended design life is often lower, and the maintenance cost as well.
And are developers open to consider these additional layers of security and resiliency when they're into their projects? Do they mind you coming back and saying, listen, we have to kind of change our thought process or our design because it has to be resilient? It's going to cost us more. Sourcing the material will be different. Probably the material we're going to source will cost more, will add more burden on the project overall cost.
I don't know that whether or not they mind. It is part of our process to educate the client, though, and that includes educating on what the risks are. And so, we may present a range of risks, and they may not care and still do what they were going to do anyway. But as professional practice providers, it's our responsibility to paint that picture of, this is what can happen and these are the risks, and let them decide and move forward with them. But it's something that oftentimes we found when educating the client and when being able to articulate the return on investment for one system instead of another, we've found an alignment to move forward.
What considerations do you put in place or take you consider when you're designing a certain project or when you're pretty much into embarking on a new project? What are these certain, the main considerations that you put in place? Are you
So that
are
it
you
could
are you
be.
and I'm trying to figure out what you're driven by. Is it your engineering side or your architecture side? Is it the creativity part, the shape, the look, the feel, the feeling of walking to that property when it's finished, right? Checking it out, living in it, experiencing it, or no, it's actually the practical part of building an engineering wise and sustainable development that would live for decades down the road and not crack or have issues or problems or break because of the ever-changing climate factors. I'm just a little bit because you kind of marry both worlds and it's really, really interesting, your profile. So
I do, and it's intentional and deliberate that I don't want to compromise because of one or the other. And so every decision does have a sort of compromise, and we often make decision matrices that, we may not be making the decision, it may be our client, but we're giving them all of the information. And so it might be the aesthetic impact or the quality of the experience if you have, or the quality or the impact to the environment if you have double the number of piles in the water for a pier versus if you get a stronger material and you can have greater spans and length, but maybe the carbon footprint of sourcing that material is higher than something that could be sourced more locally. And so those are all things that we look at. And some of it are, structural considerations. Some of them are environmental considerations. Some of them are the quality of the experience. And so we do weigh all of those. And it's oftentimes not, me in a high tower deciding what we're going to do. It's understanding the pros and cons of each decision along the way, and in tandem with the team, the design team, and the ownership team, as well as the operations team, making those decisions.
what's your favorite type of project? I'm asking you the question differently now. What's your favorite type of project?
I mean, any project where we can enable recreational access, I think, is always really beautiful and kind of speaks to the mission of being able to connect individuals with nature, and finding new ways to redevelop otherwise urban dense environments into something that has the ability to connect with nature. And so those are always my favorite. That could be a waterfront park, that could be a recreational pier, that could be a backyard dock that has a floating landing on it for a homeowner to be able to get out on the water with their family and experience the river. So anything that involves that connection to nature.
How about your favorite customer?
The
challenging one, the provocative one, the one that goes with your recommendation, the one that questions you.
I don't want anything to be too easy. We like a challenge. Certainly the challenges yield the most creative results. But I would say clients that we feel like partners in the development, that we bring our area of expertise and we're respected for our areas of expertise, but we also respect that the client might have a different vision or a different budget or a different schedule that we need to marry into. And so having that mutual respect and collaborating as team members is always very rewarding.
And you like the educated customer, the one who knows a little bit of engineering and architecture, or the one who's focused more on, again, the experience of the final product?
I wouldn't say I like one more than the other. It depends on the individual. It depends on the scope of work. Certainly always appreciate when clients are educated, but still curious and eager and willing to learn new things. I would say that there is something empowering about having clients that know nothing about waterfront development or construction or architecture or engineering, and just have implicit trust in us to do what we do, but are still willing to engage. That's always very rewarding as well.
Interesting. What is the biggest project that you ever worked on?
The biggest project. I was the senior project manager for the citywide ferry landing system, which is basically every ferry landing that's gone into New York Harbor since 2017 in the East River and in the Rockaways. So that's certainly an impactful project. Other projects, East Side Coastal Resiliency, we talked about, we have a limited scope, but that is a very large project. Similarly, we're working on the Harlem River Greenway, which is another 5-mile stretch of different shoreline conditions that are being rehabilitated. Yeah, so we've worked on a number of kind of large-scale projects as well as the small scale that are important, impactful projects for cities and for their owners and their residents.
I was checking your YouTube, videos that had you featured. One of them is the rising tide and how you're saving the coastal cities from disaster. How are you saving these cities from disaster?
So I mean, we work on different scale projects. We do have a team of planners in house that will work on larger scale, regional scale projects, and we look at harbor management plans. We look at local waterfront revitalization programs. So we're designing and putting in programming constraints at a different scale than a typical project. But I would say even on a localized site, understanding that what an owner does to shore up the stability of their infrastructure inherently does affect the neighboring properties as well. And so designing for future considerations, future sea level rise, future flood concerns, certainly even on a localized, individualized site, has farther reaching benefits to the communities by strengthening the shorelines, which again are connected to the waterways, are connected to the habitats and the ecosystems in the waterways, and can benefit communities not only today but down the line as well.
Do you like working on big projects, Dena?
I do. There's something about working on a high profile project that you feel a different maybe level of impact than sometimes on a smaller project. So it is nice to have exposure and work on these higher profile projects, because you also have oftentimes a more dynamic team and greater levels and varieties of specialists that can be educational and pique and satisfy the curiosities that we have as professionals in the industry.
How big is Indigo River today?
We have about 20 people right now.
And how far do you want to drive it? How big you want to grow it?
I answered that in our first couple of years, and we've surpassed it time and again. So I don't self-limit. I just, it depends on, we have a couple irons in the fire at any time, and some of them hit and we grow as we need. We try not to grow for individualized projects, but, with a holistic view in mind, and we have our North Star that we're working toward, but it's, we attract, mission-driven individuals that align with what our values are, and we'll continue doing so as long as, our clients find our work valuable.
So what are your values?
Oh, we just had a team building exercise where we were kind of rattling them off. We did a Mentimeter poll, and a lot of the same ones come up year after year, and it does, reflect the individuals on our team, but it reflects what we stand for as well. And so some of the, standard honesty and integrity and transparency and environmental considerations and diversity, kind of top of mind.
Do you have a military background?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any military background?
Not formally, no. I did work for the Army Corps of Engineers for a year overseas, though.
Because you talk and sound like you do have a military background, especially when you talk about honesty and integrity.
Well, my partner's a Navy veteran, and so maybe some of that has rubbed off.
It did. It definitely did. So, so you're happy with the growth of Indigo River so far?
Happy indeed, yes.
You think it will grow more in the future?
I think so, and not growing necessarily for the sake of growing, but growing for the additional opportunities that it offers us. And as we grow our team, our service offerings grow, our bandwidth, our bench, our depth of expertise and knowledge grows as well.
So what are the challenges of building a startup? Or you're an entrepreneur, so you've went through the whole process. What are the main challenges of building a startup in the United States today, in the AEC industry in particular, and growing it?
I often reframe kind of the challenge as the opportunity, and I think in our case, what we've found helps us continuously is the quality of our team members. And so the number one could be challenge, could be threat, could be opportunity, could be a lot of things, but is who you're assembling on your team and who you're working with and who's representing, whose agency you're asserting on the behalf of the company.
So finding the right people.
Always.
Do you have the right people today? You're happy with the team? Yeah?
We are happy. We are a great group, and highly intelligent, but also people that we like working with, we care about. It's a good group.
What do you have more, engineers or architects?
Depends depends on where you count me, I guess. Engineers, quantity, we have engineers, but if we consider the planners and the architects together, it's about even. Yeah, but we actually, I will say proudly that we do, especially for a professional service firm in the architecture and engineering industry, we do have more women than men, and in senior leadership positions as well, which is unique for the industry.
Where do you see the industry in 10 years from now?
I see rapid development and evolution in terms of technology and materials.
Rapid development and evolution in terms of technology and materials. Does that mean that we'll be able to produce developments much faster than we do today?
It could. It could also mean greater and more efficient designs. It could mean more efficient use of materials. It could mean less impact to the environment. It could mean prioritizing finding and valuing, highest and best use for what humans bring to the table versus technology and digitization and threading that needle. So I think there's a lot of opportunity between both the evolution in technology and the adoption thereof, as well as material applications.
If you were empowered, if you were in charge of pretty much orchestrating and running this industry for the next 10, 15 years, what are the main topics that you would immediately address as of tomorrow, let's say? The more you woke up, you're empowered, you have all the authority you need to introduce any legislation, to introduce any regulation, or make any changes on the way we operate and run the AEC industry in this country. What are the main things that you would address?
So I think they're multi-pronged approach, but something that would require heavy study, investigation, and opportunity to redevelop is some way to make our regulation more agile. The rate at which practice is evolving and by function of the technology and the materials, things that we've already talked about, the regulation is not keeping up, and it becomes a hindrance, and the regulators' review thereof projects becomes a bottleneck, and so that is an inefficient process. I don't believe it is helping us advance and reflect society's values as quickly as we could otherwise as an industry. And so certainly a deep dive and look into the regulatory process, not saying stripping away regulation, but the process by which projects are permitted, the codes and the process by which codes evolve and change and are revised, and how that keeps up with societal values today or can get ahead of. Other areas that I look at are the pipeline of who the professional practitioners are and where the attrition occurs and where the opportunity is to correct some of the systemic injustices in terms of equity and diversity. And so starting very early on in primary grade school, kind of nursing a healthy pipeline that's representative of our society, I feel would be very important and reflect well on future generations as well, to be a part of the process and not only perpetuate some of the systemic injustices that have existed to date.
This is a very strong and bold statement that you just made. The very last two sentences are very, very strong. That's an episode by itself. But I'd like to know more. Who do you want to see more in this industry? When you talk about equity and injustice and all these really, really big and solid and powerful words, what exactly do you mean?
I want to see reflections of our society within the profession. And so that's not only, historically it was primarily dominated by white males, and that is pervasive and evident in the construct of our man-made world, of our built world. And so there are opportunities to change that narrative and change the values embedded therein through the design process by having designers, by having engineers that come from different backgrounds, have different values, have different experiences to be able to put into their design work.
So do women make better designers and engineers?
No, I don't know whether better either way, but I think having a diverse representation is the point, is that it's a voice that's heard and at the table, whereas historically it's not been.
So back to Indigo River, what is the proportion at Indigo River today? What is the ratio?
We have 10 women and 9 men.
Okay, so it's a fair split between both.
Yeah, slightly more women, but it's grown, and we've been conscious of how we've grown, not to have an imbalance, and that's been an asserted effort.
It was a blessing talking to you. We're at the top of the hour here, Dena. I just loved our conversation, and honestly, I genuinely feel like we could talk a lot more about what now that we're started drilling into into more.
Always happy to come back.
Yeah, exactly. So, but thank you for taking the time to talking to us today. We're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna actually watch this one more time. And I definitely think I have more questions for you for the next episode. We're going to focus a little bit more about the equity and diversity and the injustice out there in this industry and probably the broader market out there. But definitely, that's something really, really interesting that I'd love to talk to you about. Thank you for coming today on this session, Dena.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure talking to you. Good luck on your next projects, and I hope you ever continue to grow with Indigo River.
Thank you.